All right, so let's jump into the next training, being in metals training, which is going to be on our metal trusses. So particularly light gauge metal trusses. We do pole barn trusses as well, but we'll do a whole pole barn building type video, and I'll include all the different components in there. But this is for the light gauge metal trusses. So this is something we fabricate in my department currently, and I will show you kind of what these look like. So this is what metal trusses are. So metal trusses are an alternative to framing, so to traditional framing systems like wood or rafters or even metal rafters. They can create very complex roof lines. They're extremely lightweight, so that may be the main reason that somebody might go with these over a wood truss, is just how lightweight they are. And they're, we'll go over some talking points and sales points and advantages and disadvantages and stuff like that. This particular photo is one that was having to be installed on site because the truss was too large, and that is something we can do as well here. We don't just prefabricate trusses. We can create truss packets, which are bundles of studs that they can actually, and an install guide so that they can actually put the truss together on site. So just two quick terms you're going to need to know. C-channel. C-channel is what metal trusses are made out of. They're made out of C-channels. Sometimes they require track as well, but for the most part, they will just do our closed C-channel, which is that member you're seeing right here on the top cord, and the webbing as well. We'll talk about the different types of trusses. There's a couple different variations on trusses and namings and terminologies and stuff, so we'll go over all that. Purlins refer to, typically it's going to be hat channel, but it could be Z's or even 1x4s. Basically, it's what is going to go perpendicular to the truss so that your panels can go on top. You will not always have purlins. Purlins will only be present if it's metal roofing and there's not using decking. But for the most part, residentially at least, you're going to see them putting wood decking directly on these trusses. So just some parts of a truss, because I get asked this a lot. They say we don't speak truss terminology. So these are like the things that you need to know about a truss. So the first, let's just do the parts. The top cord of the truss is obviously the top piece that goes on. This holds the weight of the panels and things like that. The heel of the truss is the height from the bottom to where the top cord starts. So that's called the heel of the truss. And then the bottom cord of the truss is this long bottom cord here, and this is probably takes the most stress on the truss. It's actually what all this weight is going out towards the heel and the bottom cord. And then it also, holds your ceiling. It basically creates your ceiling. The webbing is where, all the load goes. So the load goes here and it distributes it out to the edge of the heel and then down into the wall, which would be down here somewhere. So these are called the webbing. The only other, really, it's not really a part of the truss, but just something you need to know is the pitch of the truss. So the pitch is the rise over the run of the truss. So what that means is, as we go up the top cord, how much height are we gaining on this truss as we move from left to right? So, for example, a 312 would be gaining 3 inches of height for every 1 foot that we travel towards the center of the truss. So if we go 1 foot to the right, that's 3 inches tall. 2 foot to the right would be 6 inches tall, 9 inches, 12 inches, and so on and so forth. So that's how we determine the pitch of the truss. They may also give you that in a degree as well. So I think a 412 is roughly 18.43 degrees or something like that. So they'll probably either specify the pitch or the rise over the run. Now again, remember, if they were to say, it gains 15 feet in the middle over, and the truss is 20 foot long, well, that's 10 foot. We're going to gain 15 feet as we travel 10 foot 15. So that means you'd put 15 over 10, and then that is your pitch, 15 over 10, which would reduce down to a 3 over 2 pitch, which is a pretty steep pitch. So anyway, that's just a couple of phrases that you'll need to know as far as what these pieces of this truss are. So let's look at a couple more terms that you'll need to know. The first is just the purlin. We talked about that. Basically, it's whatever's running perpendicular to your trusses. So if they ask about purlins, typically you're going to use hat channel, Z's, 2x4s, 2x6s, 1x4s, something that's going to run in between the trusses. It'll really depend on your on center. So your on center is going to be how far apart the trusses are. So this is a big determining factor in how strong the trusses have to be, how far they are on center. If you've done pole barns before, you know that the on center is typically 10 feet. Light gauge trusses, the on center is going to be much smaller. The most you'll see a light gauge truss is about 4 foot. But typically they're going to specify either 1 foot, 16 inches, or 2 feet. That's the most common on center, and that's makes sense because decking, wood decking, is typically 2 foot on center max. So they'll be putting decking on here, so you'll have 1, 2, and then 3, and then your wood decking would go across that 4 foot gap. So that's your on center. Your span, so this is kind of complicated, but once it's just something we need to know. The span and the length of a truss are actually different. The span of the truss is how far it's going to be going from bearing point to bearing point. All right, so a bearing point would mean that it is a wall or a post that it's under this truss that's going to take the load of the truss. So between those 2 points is your span. Your length is the overall length of the truss. Okay, so if you had a length of 30 feet but a span of 28 feet, then that would be okay to assume that you probably have these bearing points 1 foot inside the truss, so you have an extra foot hanging off the end. So that might be something that a customer talks to you about or asks you about. Say, oh, how far can your trusses span? It's different from how long our trusses can be. In theory, your trusses could technically be infinitely long as your spans were not too long. So that's something important to know. All right, so this is just a standard truss example. I think we had this poster up in the, you can ignore the pricing on here, but just for training purposes, let me go back to my slide here. Okay, just for training purposes, I included this little document that we used to have up front. So basically, this is what a standard truss looks like. This is actually called a fan truss. You don't need to know that, but just the design of this truss. But the gable is typically referred to as a standard truss, or you'll hear it called a gable truss or a common truss. But this is what it looks like. It's just like a triangle. This is by far the strongest truss as well. So if you're trying to get farther spans, this is going to be the strongest type of truss to use. An A-frame truss is the best way to get straight spans. Yeah, and it keeps the cost very low because you don't have to have a lot of webbing. There are 2 options for overhangs, so we'll look at those really quick. An overhang is whenever you run the top cord of the truss out over the bearing point, just like this. This is very cheap and a very typical way to do a overhang for, say, a building or something like that, where they're just going to run the panel out over the top cord. A cantilever truss is a little bit different. It has a built-in soffit. So the cantilever truss would actually have the bearing point of the truss be inside, and then they have a little area here where they can put their soffit and the fascia board and things like that. So definitely, something you need to ask the customer if they want an overhang is whether or not they want an overhang or a cantilever. Another thing they can do is also finish out this overhang to where it comes down and then back to the wall. So that could also create a soffit, but it would be lower than their ceiling. So that's something that you need to kind of think about. Again, just ignore the pricing, but we can do a lot of different overhangs and cantilever lengths. Quoting is super easy for trusses. We've talked about this in another training video, but our quote form is really simple, but I'll go over it one more time here. You really don't need very many things to put down, and you even have an open area here where you could draw out any kind of custom shape that you'd like, and I can do a truss. We can do a truss in quite literally any shape. Now, whether or not it's going to pass engineering is another thing, but we can design any truss in any shape whatsoever, so customers can get as crazy as they want with that. But we do need the pitch typically. The overhang distance, so whether or not that's 6'10", or 2 foot or 1 foot, 3 foot, whatever, we need that. You can put a different one on each side if they need a different overhang, which it has happened before. The span, again, will be from the bearing point, keep clicking, from the bearing point to the bearing point. So in this case, it would be kind of the same as length, unless you specify on here, here's a bearing point at 10 feet, here's one at 10, you got 10 feet span in between here, and then 2 foot and 2 foot. So, and then the bottom cord pitch, if it has a bottom cord pitch, you'll put that on here as well, which would be like a scissor truss. It comes up right, just like that. Truss install. So installing trusses is very simple, light gauge trusses especially, but I'll go over that a little bit with you so that you can help the customers with that if they have questions. There is a prescriptive method for installing trusses. So trusses can be installed simply by putting screws through the top cord of your wall, whatever that is, if it's wood or metal or whatever, through the top cord of your wall into the bottom cord of the truss. So a certain number of screws based on this chart right here. So for example, if the trusses were 24 inches on center, okay, 24 inches on center, and let's say they had a span of 40 foot, because that's a pretty long truss, and then it was in a 130 mile an hour wind zone, which is very common. That's about what it would take 6 screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inside the bottom cord of each one. So that can be done. Or another way to do it that makes it a lot more simple is to use truss clips. So these are called H3 or Hurricane 3 clips. We use these, we send these out with every truss that we sell. So every truss we sell goes with 2 Hurricane clips. And that's good because, like I said, it gives us, increases or, decreases liability for us to make sure that the contractor has what they need on site, but they can use some of these screws in their Hurricane clip. So for example, this right here has 2 right here, 2 right here, that's 4. They'd only need to put 2 clips or 2 screws up through the bottom of their truss. So that can help decrease the number of screws that they have to use with their trusses. So anyway, that's, like I said, something to know, just to give them a little info on how you may install the truss. All right, so there are 2 different types of trusses we manufacture at B&M. They're very simple. One of them is called a back-to-back. We'll go over this one first. This is the one you've been seeing in the examples. This is 90% of all trusses that will be manufactured at B&M are going to be back-to-back. And what that means is you've got the C-channel laying this way, and then you have the back of that C-channel laying against that. So literally it's back-to-back C-channel. This truss is very strong. It's very easy to install, very quick to put together. So this is by far the most common truss you'll see. The other type of truss is inline trusses. Now, an inline truss is built more like a wall. You have a track that runs along the bottom, a track that runs on the top cord, and then your webbing is C-channel. So your webbing is C-channel that runs like this, just like you would build a wall. If you see any of our light gauge walls, this is what they will look like. So anyway, this type of truss is usually used for either cosmetic reasons, or it is used as the gable truss or the last truss on a building. And the reason it's used for that is because it's easy to put panels on. It's easy to put OSB or metal panels because it has a flat surface, whereas trying to put metal panels on this would be very difficult because they're open. So that's something to think about, but typically an inline truss is going to be for a cosmetic reason because it looks a lot cleaner, but they cannot span as far, they're not as strong, so something to think about there. Typical truss system. So now this is just some terminology to help you guys whenever we're talking to customers about trusses. Selling individual trusses is one thing, but a truss system is much more complex and has a lot more pieces, but all the trusses in a truss system work together to create a roof system. So this is all the different components that would typically make up a roof system. So I'll go over each of those so that you know kind of what a customer might be talking about. So this right here is called your gable truss. So this is what I was talking about. Typically a wall is going to be directly below this gable truss, and you can see that this truss is in line, right? Like I talked about, you've got a track here, and then you've got wall studs that go up and down. This is typically what a gable truss or a gable I guess it's just called a gable truss or a gable frame is going to look like. Is going to look more like a continuation of the wall. A soffit box, or it could also be called a gable frame, is this little ladder right here that creates your overhang for your end wall. So this is the end wall of the building, this is the side wall. So to create the overhang for your end wall, you're typically going to have what's called a soffit box. It's just like a ladder system. It's made out of a regular C-channel, it looks just like a wall, but they will lay that ladder on top of their gable frame, and then it will tie into their first truss, and so that creates the overhang. And now this is common in wood design as well, so this is a pretty common design philosophy for creating an end wall frame or end wall overhang. But anyway, just something to think about. If they're coming from wood, it's actually pretty common, and it's pretty much the same system that they use. Then you've got your trusses, which is what we've been talking about. You've got your metal trusses. These are all inline on this example, but like I said, they could be back-to-back as well. You got your trusses. Your overhang of your truss is what goes over the wall. See, that's your load-bearing wall that you see running down through here. And then if they are not using decking, you would have a purlin on top, which would be your hat channel that runs on top like this. Okay, and that's pretty much it. The only other thing I can think of is you'd have your truss clips if you need more screws. Rather than putting it through the top cord into the truss, you could do truss clips. You'd have truss clips right here. You may also see bracing. If there is bracing on the order, you can imagine that it would be like these hat channel members, but they would be inside the truss. So they would go from web to web to web to web to web to web, keeping the trusses together while the installers are trying to line everything up and put things in place. So you will see that as well. On some truss systems, you'll see a bracing system, which, and like I said, that's typically just for very large or very tall trusses. You'll see some interior bracing. So types of trusses. So I put this up literally to just illustrate that you will never learn all the different types of trusses. And if you download 5 different things like this, you're going to have all different names. The naming conventions and stuff for trusses are not they're not standardized. But we can, I can go over a couple of these that I think are more common, and some of the ones that we've built, and then tell you kind of what the alternative names are. So your common truss or standard truss is something that's going to look like this. Like, it's going to have a triangle and it's going to have webbing inside of it, and that webbing can follow any kind of pattern. It's usually just based on engineering. So just keep an eye on that. But like I said, most of the time we're going to call these standard trusses, or they can be called gable trusses as well. Now, a gable truss is typically referring to a standard truss that is going above the gable wall. So like I said, it'll look more like this. It's going to have vertical webbing to match the gable, the wall that's below it. A scissor truss is really common. A scissor truss is where you have 2 pitches on the roof. So you have one on top and then one on the bottom, so it creates more headroom. A mono scissor truss. We actually built one of these last week for a customer as a decorative type thing. So it was a very small heel here, and then the top heel was very large. And then they were going to put them up to look like rafters. So that was kind of a thing. Dual pitch is a truss, obviously, that has 2 different pitches. So you got like a 312 on one side, then maybe like an 812 on this side. So that's a common type of truss. A cathedral truss is also common. It's very similar to a scissor truss, but the cathedral area will be typically located somewhere else in the truss. So it may be on the right side, the left side, or just the center. So it's like, but a scissor truss will always be the full length of the truss. A flat truss. So this is what our floor trusses are. So if you're talking about a flat truss, it may also be called a parallel cord truss. I'll show you that in just a second, but it may be called just a parallel cord truss, or a flat truss, or a floor truss. So that's what they look like. They have no pitch, but they just have a large heel height. Gambrel is something you'll see on like older barns. They go up and then they have 2 pitches. So it goes up on a steep pitch and then it has like a narrower, a lower pitch on the top. We can do attics inside of our trusses. So again, like I said, all of these truss types can be made out of our system. It's just a matter of drawing it up and getting the dimensions and then working with the customer to get the right thing for them. But all of these trusses can be made out of our system. So like I said, you've got parapet trusses, sloping parapets, parallel cord scissors, there's mono parallel cords, so max parapets. So these are all different types of trusses in the industry that anyway, just be prepared to hear some names, but there are resources like this out there that have other terminologies and stuff like that. So if you have to help a customer, just know those resources are available. Like I said, worst case, just draw it or have them give you a picture of it, and we'll go from there. And that's it. So that's light gauge trusses. So one thing I will show you is in the Dropbox, some of the resources that we have currently available for metal trusses. There aren't many of them yet, but they are getting uploaded. So by the time you guys watch this video, there may be more already in there. But if you go to Dropbox Products and then go to Steel Framing and then go to Trusses, this is where all of our stuff is, and then go to light gauge. Right now you just have the truss quote form, which I'll put in here. Just the truss quote form, which you can download and fill out for customers. There's also should be some in the front offices and things like that. Let's see, we have Oh, there's a brochure. I think there's a couple brochures actually. So there's an older brochure that we used to use, which is still pretty relevant. We need to update some of the photos because we use a different system now, but this is still a great brochure to use for to give customers basic information. There's also a new one for 2023. I believe it's in here. This one, yep, that was just made. So there's a bifold brochure that's in here, and it's got some of the advantages of metal. It's got like a really quick about us page. It's got some photos, some contact us. So this is a really good one maybe to keep up in the front offices because it's really simple and easy. And then I believe there's a sales script. So there is a sales script right now. This will be refined over time and will probably change by the time you guys read it, but it does give you some basic information about maybe what a conversation about metal trusses may be like, and then just some really quick selling points on metal trusses, so why they might go with the strength and durability, lightweight, things like that. So and in a lot of our products you'll start to see these sales scripts pop up. And that's what these are. They're just references. They're just to be used to help you kind of get a basic understanding of them maybe before you get on the phone with someone or before you call to do a pitch. So I hope this was, I know this is a lot of info. Like I said, I think this is one of the shorter ones, but hopefully this will give you some of the basic information that you need to try to get these things sold. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. And like I said, worst case, always just submit those quote forms to the light gauge department and we can get you a quote pretty quickly, or any kind of more in-depth engineering or design information you need, we can get for you. So thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you in the next one.